we were running out of cash. We were kind of like in between rounds, not sure we were able to raise another round. And it like kind of hit me. Shutting down, you never really think about it. You never think about like the worst case scenario. You're always running forward as a founder. How do I get to the next milestone? How do I keep pushing forward? How do I think about revenue? How do I think about staying alive? You never think about shutting down. What are the liabilities? What are the costs? What's the timeline? If we need to, do we need to shut down? If so, when? Do we need to do layoffs? Do we need to give heads up if we need to do layoffs? Like, when no one wants to get to a point where we're completely out of cash. It can get pretty messy. Directors could be liable. The corporate veil could be pierced. And obviously, we don't want to go down that path and go into worst case scenario of even bankruptcies and things like that. I had no idea how to shut down a business.
90% of startups fail. I backed a new company, SimpleClosure. TechCrunch called them the Grim Reaper of startups. I've got the founder, Dori, here to talk about what the company does, why he decided to start it, and why shutting down is painful for founders, not just emotionally, but also logistically. So, Dori, I'm excited to have you here. First question for you is, what does SimpleClosure do?
In short, we automate the shutdown process for companies. Historically, it's been a very manual and expensive process. And so we help founders move on to their next project by automating the shutdown process.
When TechCrunch profiled you guys, they talked about you in a podcast later, and they called you the, quote, Grim Reaper of startups, which sounds a little predatory or exploitative. What do you have to say to that? And what about your own personal story led you to start this company?
What makes me feel confident that I don't think we're the Grim Reapers of startups is actually getting on calls with customers. And when they got on a call with us, I promise you, they don't show a scary face, so they're not afraid of us. Actually, it's been really, really overwhelming getting on calls with customers because I would say the exact opposite. We are almost like saviors for them. And we get on calls and they're so excited and so happy to have someone and something in a product and a platform that can help them navigate this process and get through the process of shutting down. So although I know the tagline is maybe a bit catchy and funny, I actually think we're doing the exact opposite. I think we're doing something really powerful, really empowering, helping these founders that are struggling move on to their next thing and close up shop. And so that's what actually gives me so much energy and motivates me so much. Actually, someone asked me, how can you keep doing this? How are you dealing with the world of shutting down? Isn't this like a depressing world? So obviously it is depressing from the fact that companies are shutting down. And that's honestly the last outcome that we wish to any founder, and any opportunity, by the way, where founders come to us and we can somehow connect to a potential M&A or some kind of positive acquisition. We do that. We do that by default. But in most cases, unfortunately, that doesn't work. And so I actually think that we are really helping these founders overcome these obstacles and challenges. And so hopefully that saying wears off.
Yeah, for anyone who has had to shut down a company, I think they can immediately understand why something like this is needed. I had to shut down a very small, simple company, and it was a total pain. And I had some like letters I got from secretaries of state saying, hey, you owe taxes. It's like, my company doesn't exist. And then someone hadn't checked the right box, the right place. Also, talk to me about your story too, your experience shutting down your first company and how that kind of led to, this idea.
So that experience you had, you're not alone. And I thought I was alone when I had that experience. And I'll talk about what led me to believe that there's a really big opportunity here. But I was previously the founder of a consumer fintech company. We had raised our seed round. We were running out of cash. We were kind of like in between rounds, not sure we were able to raise another round. And I was in a board meeting presenting the financials to the board. And one of our board members looks at the runway and the operating plan and says, hey, Dori, I think we need to consider shutting down. And it like kind of hit me. It's one of those words or things that, shutting down, you never really think about it. You never think about like the worst case scenario. You're always running forward as a founder. How do I get to the next milestone? How do I keep pushing forward? How do I think about revenue? How do I think about staying alive? You never think about shutting down. And so I asked the board member specifically, like, what would you like to see? And he's like, I'd like to know, what are the liabilities? What are the costs? What's the timeline? If we need to, do we need to shut down? If so, when? Do we need to do layoffs? Do we need to give heads up if we need to do layoffs? Like, I'd like to see and understand this, because when no one wants to get to a point where we're completely out of cash, then it can get pretty messy. Directors could be liable. The corporate veil could be pierced. And obviously, we don't want to go down that path and go into worst case scenario of even bankruptcies and things like that. And so I said, no problem. I'll follow up. I went home that evening from the board meeting. I had homework to do. I had no idea how to shut down a business. The first thing I did naturally was go to Google and search on Google how to shut down a startup. Unfortunately, didn't find any substantial information that I could trust or that I could feel confident with. No services, no platforms, anything like that. The next thing I did was try to reach out to other founders in my network. I thought, okay, what's the problem? I'm sure there's a founder in my network that shut down their company. Let me talk to them and see what they went through. So I started going on LinkedIn and searching in my LinkedIn for, words around shutting down and dissolution and things like that. Didn't find anyone in my network that shut down. And
this is kind of crazy, right? Because 90% of startups fail. Most businesses, after 5 years, they don't exist anymore. So it's crazy to think that so many entrepreneurs have had this problem and lived it personally, and there still just is no good solution for helping out.
100%. I think part of the problem is it's almost a taboo topic. Like, no one wants to talk about it. No one feels comfortable to talk about it. And so that was part of my learning when I was going through LinkedIn. It wasn't that people didn't shut down their companies. They just didn't want to talk about it, or they didn't post about it. So 100% agree there. So that didn't yield any results. And so naturally I went to our law firm. We were using a top 5 I would say general tech firm, right? One of the top Coolies, Fenwicks of the world. And went to our partner and said, hey, I need help putting together a shutdown plan. And he was like, oh, shutting down. Yeah, we're not really we can't really help you there. Happy to refer you to some other law firm. They might be able to help you. I have a friend of a friend. He has a boutique firm in Colorado or Texas or something like that. And he was like, they wouldn't help me. And our CPA actually said the same. We were using a CPA and we don't deal with shutting down. And so I felt just, really lost and stressed at a point in time where you're probably at the lowest point of your career in your company and couldn't find a solution, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to do what any founder does. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and figure out how to shut down a company, and spent quite a few weeks diving into the world, understanding how to shut down a company. What are the things we need to take into consideration? Got lost myself, but eventually came out of it with okay, I have an understanding of how this works, presented a plan to the board, and the board was like, great, this looks okay. We can continue. And we had a plan set. Actually, things ended up picking up with the company, and we kind of pivoted and raised another round and ended up selling it a few years later. But that pain and frustration has sat with me for a while. And then connecting to what you said around getting penalties or fines years later, I started exploring the space earlier this year. And when I mean exploring, I would say focused on 2 things. One, understanding the market and doing market research and seeing how big of an opportunity it is. And I think what really shocked me was that there's between 700,000 and 1 million companies that shut down every year in the US. And if you look at the US economy, the SMB market historically over years, it's actually really interesting. There's about 700,000 to 800,000 that start every year, and about 700,000 to 1 million that shut down every year. So the growth of the small business economy is pretty flat, because the same amount of companies start and shut down every year. And so that surprised me, right? And if you think about it, there's so many companies that serve companies to incorporate: the Zen Business, the Rocket Lawyers, the Legal Zooms, the Stripe Atlases. There's so much of that.
From a business opportunity, you think about, shutting down, maybe that's just a short-term opportunity because the tech ecosystem is undergoing a contraction. Most of the economy is still not tech. There's 700,000 small businesses being created. And so, yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff to be done now. And a lot of tech founders have lived through this and felt the pain, but this is a pain that's shared, across the entire economy and the entire country.
I think those numbers magnify to me that this is not just a tech issue. This is a overall SMB market and space, and there's a real big opportunity.
I'd love to hear an example of if you don't do it right, some of the things that can go wrong. Just a very short, simple example. And then 2, how you, the product and technology and process you build, can help prevent that from happening.
Sure. So things that can go wrong span from getting lawsuits from vendors that were not properly shut down or contracts are terminated, all the way to getting payments, fines and penalties from states and unemployment accounts. And I'll give you a few examples of what could happen. One that's really interesting. So I don't know if you know this, but if you're on a Gusto, for example, and you're paying your payroll in California, and then you shut down your Gusto account and you think you're done because you finished payroll and you fired all employees, Gusto does not notify California and close your account with California. And what California does is they continue to calculate estimates based on your past filings of how much you owe. And what will happen is you'll suddenly get months later a penalty or fine based on the estimates that the state of California did of money you're owed. What typically happens and amplifies this even more is when you shut down your business, you usually shut down your office address. And so they've been sending you notices for 6 months, a year and a half too. and no one's at that address.
This is exactly what happened to me. I shut down my business. California EDD, the Employment Development Department,
They will hunt you down.
they sent me to like the old messages, so I missed them for a long time. And then I found all these messages that I hadn't been getting. I also didn't have to run payroll because I didn't even actually have any employees. It was that simple of a situation. But then they sent me this letter. It's like, you owe all these taxes, and you have for like a year and a half. And I was like, uh-oh.
So you know the pain, right? And I think that's what also got me excited, obviously, to partner with you and Camryn, is because like you've been through this, you know the pain, you know how difficult it is an opportunity. But yeah, that's an example, or another example. We've actually had customers come to us that completely shut down with their law firm and accounting firm, and then they heard about us and like, you know what, we want to just get this extra level verification. And so they come to us when they think they're done. It's like behind them. And we actually found states that they're still open with and have open debt with. Because again, to your point, we have built technology that can go and search in all 50 Secretary of States to make sure that some lawyer or some registered agent didn't open an account for you that you may have forgotten, right? And so in those cases, we've saved, customers from getting penalties and fines. But I think that's a great example that amplifies how technology can help automate and streamline a process like this.
So if you don't do things right correctly, what does piercing the corporate veil mean, and why does that really matter for founders who want to just put this behind them?
So one of the advantages of opening a corporation or an LLC is pretty much you have protection between you personally and the company. So any things that happen for the most part regarding the company are protected between that corporate veil is actually a protection between the corporation or the LLC and the partner or founder. And so there are certain things that if they're done incorrectly, and for example is like not paying taxes to the state or not paying wages to employees, where if you do not do that, you're actually not protected by the corporate veil, and that corporate veil could get pierced. And the employee can come after you as a founder personally, or the state can come after you as a founder or director of the company personally.
So the last thing you want to do as a founder after you shut down a business is get sued personally. If you're an investor and you invest, sometimes some of the liability, depending on the specific circumstances, can reside with the board of directors, not just with the founders and the operators. And then I want to talk too about a little bit what the opportunity looks like in terms of, you are helping companies shut down, but what does it look like to build more of a platform offering or some of the products you can create based on your core offering of transitioning businesses to shut down smoothly and compliantly and quickly?
I think that's a great question. It's something that we're continuing to learn in the process in building our platform is when we started thinking about the market and serving founders, we've been solely focused on building a product to serve founders and stakeholders in the process of shutting down a company. But what we learned in that process is actually, if you think about a company shutting down, it's not a singular point in time or a singular problem that the company's facing. There's actually an ecosystem that is impacted when a company shuts down. So if you think about all the things that are connected to a company, they have customers and they have vendors and they have investors and they have VCs and they have IRS and accounting and legal and all these different things that are touching the aspects of the business. And each one of them has a pain point, has at least one pain point, if not multiple pain points of their own. And so what we're learning is actually that they all need help in different ways. And I can give a few examples of that. One is, for example, we've had vendors come to us that when a company shuts down, they need to start negotiating an open bill. And that company that's shutting down doesn't always have enough capital to pay the full outstanding bill. And so that vendor has come to us and say, hey, how can we work with you to help streamline this process? This costs us a lot of manpower. It's not worth our finance team. We're obviously not going to sue a company over $2,000 of a bill, but we'd like to work in collaboration. And so that's an example. Or for investors, we've had so many founders come to us and say, hey, their investors need it's typically called like a statement of information or something along the lines to show they've invested, I'm an angel investor. I invested $50,000 in a company. The company didn't work out. They returned 10 grand to me as an investor. So I lost $40,000 on this investment. As an angel investor, I need to be able to use that information and write it off on my tax return, right? And that's an example of how VCs and investors are also impacted in that process. And so we're building a platform to help serve the ecosystem as a whole.
And I think, there's been so much innovation, like we talked about earlier, in how companies get created, but an incredibly important part of the ecosystem is also allowing companies to shut down gracefully. And so working on that aspect of it is important. The corollary here would be, hopefully you won't fail as, a founder, but if you do, know that there are paths available to you to make that process less painful. And so I'd love to hear, how do people get in touch if they're thinking about shutting down, whether they're an investor or a founder?
So one, I want to say I totally believe in that quote. Our goal is not to shut down companies. Like, we want companies to strive and succeed. If that's the end of the line, we just want to make sure that it's done in a graceful way, like you said. The easiest way is to just go to our website, simpleclosure.com, sign up there. We make sure to onboard customers at their pace. So some customers are like, hey, we need to shut down today. We need help. We're literally in the midst of this. Can we onboard? And we get them on board to the platform same day. And some customers are like, hey, we're trying to go out and raise another round. We've been trying for a few months. We're exploring M&A. But if it doesn't work out, I'd like to understand, or we'd like to understand, what are our options? What are the costs? How does this work? And so obviously we're also serving those customers. So I would say the best is just to go to our website, sign up. Anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with any founder. If they just want to, get some advice, ask questions, always happy to help founders. We're able to provide information for founders and help them through this process. And obviously, we'd like to help them on our platform, but we're happy to help either way. This is a painful process, and trying to help founders move on to what's next.
Thanks so much for sharing a little bit about what SimpleClosure is up to.
Thanks for the time, Rex.